At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, without any artificial voices or AI slop. I mean, after all, what's HFY without humanity? My name's the Voice Ogre, and let's begin. The klaxon blared, a high-pitched chorus signaling metal fatigue and imminent collapse. On the ore hauler Iron Grasp's bridge, every console glowed a uniform, alarming red. Chief Engineer Orlan, a Castralan with a heavy, layered silicate plating, gestured with a three-fingered hand that trembled so hard it shed fine gray dust.
"It's the field controller,"
he rasped, his vocal cords vibrating against his articulated, bony neck frill.
"Completely shorted out. The containment fields are fluctuating erratically, spiking well past safety margins. A standard jump will turn this 500,000-ton hauler into a cloud of energetic confetti."
Captain Irina Voronova chewed on an unlit cigarillo, her face tight.
"Dry dock? 2 weeks, minimum. And that's if Archimedes Station has a G11 controller in stock, which is a special order part." "We're carrying refined helium-3, Orlan. The contract has a penalty clause with figures that could bankrupt the small moon."
She jammed the comms unit.
"Get me the station master, and get me Sal Corey in Engineering Deck C. Tell her I'm authorizing hazard pay."
Orlan's frill tightened.
"Corey's crew. Captain, they're good, but they're mechanics. What you need is a miracle worker." "I'll take a mechanic who can get his hands dirty over a theorist with clean fingernails any day."
Voronova grunted.
"Make the call."
Liam O'Connell had his arms submerged in a plasma conduit when the comm crackled with Sal's voice.
"O'Connell, get your skinny ass up to the Iron Grasp. Bridge. Now. They got a spicy drive problem." "Spicy how?"
Liam grunted, tightening a magnetic clamp with a satisfying thunk.
Jalapeno or ghost pepper?
Well, let's just say if you screw this up, the station gets a new, rapidly expanding debris field for a neighbor,"
Sal said.
"Voronova's authorizing hazard pay."
Liam wiped a streak of black lubricant from his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving a darker smear.
"Now that's an incentive I understand."
He arrived on the Iron Grasp's bridge minutes later, a lanky human in grease-stained coveralls, carrying a battered work slate that looked like it had survived atmospheric re-entry. The air was thick with the smell of burnt insulation and the acrid bite of fried circuits. Captain Voronova nodded at him.
"O'Connell, my engineer says that we're dead in the water."
Liam looked at the readouts on the main display. He looked past the primary alerts, a chain of failure codes and strobing proximity warnings, to the tertiary data streams. Low-level energy fluctuations, the containment field's phase variance, subtle gravimetric distortions bleeding from the drive core. He traced the distortions back, finding their source in a feedback loop deep within the drive. They were trying to replace a broken gear. The whole machine was out of sync. He pulled out his work slate. Its screen was a chaotic mesh of handwritten notes, fractal-like diagrams, and seizure-inducing equations. But to Liam, the chaos held a clear logic, and his stylus darted across the surface, connecting variables with sweeping lines and tight, nested formulas. Chief Engineer Orlan peered over his shoulder.
"What is that? Those calculations are all wrong. The Korolev constants are completely off, and you're treating space-time curvature as a variable fluid."
Liam kept his focus.
And because it is, you just have to know where the currents are.
He mumbled to himself, absorbed by the flow of numbers.
Gravimetric current, tune the coil injectors to the destination signature, ride the path of least resistance.
Sal, who had followed him, crossed his arms and leaned up against a bulkhead. He smirked. He'd seen him work this way before, lost in a problem only he could see.
"All right,"
Liam said, straightening up.
"The controller's a paperweight. I can bypass it."
Orlan's frill went rigid.
"Bypass the field controller is integral to stabilizing the ship. Bypassing it's suicide."
"The warp field is what generates the stress,"
Liam said, as if stating a simple fact. He pointed at the schematic.
"That layer's unnecessary. The primary plasma injector. We'll pulse it at a specific frequency. It'll generate a localized gravimetric current, a slipstream that connects directly to the station's docking bay. For about 3 minutes, the ship will ride that current. Voronova raised an eyebrow. Meaning? Well, meaning, instead of punching a hole through space-time, we're letting space-time carry us there. Liam said. We'll bypass the warp field, the stress, then the confetti. Just a slight tremor as we enter the slipstream, and then you're home. He shrugged. Theoretically. The only sound on the bridge was the life support's hum. Orlan looked like he was about to shed his entire plating from stress. A 3-minute microtransit, point to point, inside a station's gravity well? The notion was heresy, violating half a dozen Rylan-Korolev principles. Voronova looked from her apoplectic engineer to the mechanic, who looked calm despite his exhaustion. She took the dead cigarillo from her mouth. How sure are you about that theoretically part, son? I'm pretty sure, Liam said. The calculus holds. My engineer says it fails. Liam met her gaze. With respect, Captain, your engineer's trying to solve a complex problem with a slide rule. The calculus holds. Voronova studied him for a long moment. Then she looked at the penalty clause figures on her private flex screen. Do it, she said. The jump felt like settling into a smooth current. A deep, resonant tone vibrated through the deck plates, and the ship slid forward with an unnatural ease. Then, silence. Through the forward viewport, the grimy, familiar superstructure of Archimedes Station's repair dock Gamma filled the view. They had remained stationary, and yet they had crossed 5 kilometers. Orlan staggered over to his console, his plates rattling. He ran a diagnostic, and then another.
It's against all known principles. The drive signature is clean. The energy consumption was less than a standard thruster burn. But your calculations, they're gibberish.
Liam just shrugged, already heading for the door. The check for their hazard pay goes to Sal Corey. He clocked out and went to find a beer. Just another shift. Professor Telias adjusted the holographic display, his long, multi-jointed fingers manipulating the controls to bring the public transit log into sharper focus in his temporary office. The intricate patterns on his cranial hood, usually a slow, hypnotic swirl, tightened into sharp, focused lines. A Lyrian, a species that prized patterns above all else. He had come to the chaotic hub of Archimedes Station to observe the unique gravitational lensing around a nearby pulsar, a quiet hobby for his semi-retirement. But the pattern he studied now was entirely separate from his pulsar research. The transit log of an ore hauler, the Iron Grasp. According to the official record, it had executed a standard emergency thruster maneuver to dock for repairs. A plausible, if costly, event. Except the data was a fiction. He focused his gaze, perceiving the official energy logs as a discordant red smear overlaid on the faint, coherent blue of its actual gravimetric signature. The energy signature was too low. The temporal displacement was 0. The vector was instantaneous. The ship left point A and arrived at point B without crossing the space between. The event posed a physical paradox under the currently accepted Rylan-Korolev model of FTL travel, but it aligned perfectly with a fringe theory he himself had proposed 30 years ago, one for which his peers had ridiculed him into silence. Space-time hydrodynamics. He tapped out a sequence on the console, queuing a priority request from the Archimedes oversight, citing a potential physics anomaly requiring immediate scholarly review. Hours later, he received their official summary. The dry report concluded no anomalies found, but they had falsified the energy consumption and vector data to support their conclusion. The lie was more compelling than any truth. A standard warp jump left a chaotic wake of radiation. This event, according to their own doctored data, left a signature as clean as a sine wave. The comparison was like a chainsaw to a scalpel. The patterns on Telias' hood swirled into a deep, vibrant violet. He cross-referenced the ship's logs with the station's engineering duty roster for that timestamp. Deck C, lead mechanic, Salima Khoury, a handful of assistants, and one specialist called in for the drive problem, Liam O'Connell. The professor leaned back, lacing his fingers together in contemplation. A mechanic, a human mechanic, had performed a practical application of a theory that the greatest minds in the Galactic Compact had dismissed as a mathematical fantasy. Talias had dedicated his life to the idea that intuition, the ability to feel the shape of a problem, was as valid a scientific tool as formal logic. And on a dirty, loud space station, a human mechanic had just proven him right. He had to find this Liam O'Connell. The cantina on Archimedes Station, the vent, lived up to its name. A slow drip of condensation from an overhead pipe periodically plopped into a bucket in the corner. The air was thick, carrying the sharp scent of ionized air from the life support scrubbers. Fried food and engine coolant. The vent was Liam's favorite place in the universe. He slouched in a booth with Sal and two other members of their crew, Mako and Cora, arguing about the merits of kinetic versus magnetic socket wrenches.
Kinetics are for butchers,
Liam was saying, nursing a beer.
You lose the feeling for the torque. I need the bolt off before my shift ends. Feeling the torque is a luxury.
Mako countered, waving a piece of fried synth kelp for emphasis. Professor Talias entered the cantina, a stark anomaly in the grimy, blue-collar environment. Tall and slender, his robes immaculate, his movements measured. He steepled his multi-jointed fingers before him in a calm observational posture. He looked more suited to classifying a new species of hyphal bloom than entering a bar. Every patron turned. He scanned the room and settled his gaze on their booth. He crossed the room to them, his movements unnervingly silent.
"Pardon the intrusion,"
he said, his voice a calm melodic baritone.
"I am looking for a Mr. Liam O'Connell."
Sal's expression went from amused to suspicious. He slid his arm protectively in front of Liam.
"Who's asking?" "My name is Professor Talias, from Sol Corva University's Department of Theoretical Physics."
Mako choked on a synth kelp. Cora stared, wide-eyed. A university professor was about as common in the vent as a sober pilot. Liam just looked tired.
"This is about the bypass on the Iron Grasp's drive. The captain signed off on it. We acted within regulations."
"Quite the contrary," Talias said, and the patterns on his hood slowed, softening into broad, gentle curves.
"I am here to discuss your mathematics."
Liam's defensiveness sharpened. That was a patch job. The numbers were just to finish the job.
"A patch job,"
Talias repeated, his voice low. He tilted his head, a deeply considerate Lyrian gesture.
"You treated space-time as a fluid medium, assigning it a variable flow resistance. You calculated a stable gravimetric current between two distinct spatial coordinates. This is far more than a patch job, Mr. O'Connell. This is a paradigm shift."
Liam stared at him. The professor understood. He spoke the language fluently, piercing to the idea's core. The realization was more jarring than any accusation. He offered a thin data chip, sliding it across the sticky table.
"These are my papers from 30 years ago."
He gestured to the chip.
"They contain the foundational theory for what you would call fluidic calculus, a theory whose practical application eluded me."
Sal picked up the chip, eyeing it as if it were a bomb.
"Your work on the Iron Grasp was the practical proof,"
Talias continued, his gaze on Liam.
"Your intuitive leap is the final component. Sol Corva University has therefore authorized me to offer you a full scholarship to study under my personal tutelage."
The table fell silent. The steady drip from the overhead pipe paused. Liam just stared at the professor. A scholarship? To a university? Such an alien idea, so far beyond his life scope, his mind failed to grasp it. He fixed things. His place was in engine rooms, surrounded by machinery. He gave a short, brittle laugh. Professor, you've got the wrong guy, Liam said, shaking his head. I'm a grease monkey. A spanner. I just got lucky with that hauler. He stood up, pushing his half-finished beer away. Thanks for the offer, but I've got a shift in the morning. He walked from the cantina and kept walking, leaving a bewildered crew and the Lyrian scholar disappointed but undeterred in his wake. Liam's quarters were a small metal box that he generously called an apartment. He had crammed his sanctuary with salvaged tech, half-finished projects, and greasy coveralls. Tonight, the walls pressed in on him. He sat on the edge of his bunk, staring at the data chip Tellius had left. Sal had shoved it into his pocket before he left, muttering something about him being the biggest idiot he'd ever met. He plugged it into his work slate. The professor's papers appeared on the screen. Title: On Space-Time as a Fluid Medium in Gravimetric Current Transitions. The formalisms, written in an abstract theoretical language, were dense, but underneath the syntax, the core ideas shimmered, the shimmering ghost in his own intuitive calculus. Tellius had done more than understand his work. He had anticipated it decades ago. The professor had seen the validation of his life's work in the scrawled notes of a station mechanic. A familiar fear seized him, the fear of someone truly seeing him. All his life, his identity rested on being the smart kid who could fix anything. This useful, practical kind of smarts earned him respect in the grimy corridors of Archimedes Station. It kept him safe. The world Tellius offered, academia, theoretical physics, genius, that was dangerous. There, he'd be the uneducated fraud, the imposture waiting for exposure. A sharp rap on his door made him jump. Sal let himself in, holding 2 bottles of beer.
Brooding looks terrible on you,
he said, tossing him a bottle.
You look like a constipated wombat.
Liam remained silent, his gaze fixed on the screen. Sal sat down next to him, his presence filling the small room. He glanced at the papers on his work slate.
So, you're gonna call him back, or are you gonna spend the rest of your life arguing about wrenches with Mako? That world is for other people, Sal,
Liam said, his voice quiet.
Those people, they're a different species. And I mean more than just the fact that they're aliens. Bullshit,
he said, taking a long pull from his beer.
Liam, I've known you since you were a 14-year-old orphan hot-wiring the station's cargo loaders to race them in the maintenance tunnels. You were doodling these crazy space maps on napkins back then. You belonged there more than anyone.
That's different. That's just fiddling. This is real.
You've always done this,
he countered, his voice rising with passion.
You do more than fix things. You understand them. You see the music behind the machine. This professor, this Tellius guy, he's the first person who's ever heard the same song that you do. You gonna run away from that?
He softened his tone, nudging Liam's shoulder.
Look, I get it. It's scary. But are you happy here? Truly? Are you happy just fixing other people's rust buckets for the rest of your life, knowing that your brain is capable of that?
He jabbed a thumb at the equation on the screen. The question slammed into him, decisive and final. Was he happy? He was comfortable and safe, but happy. He looked at the half-disassembled hyperdrive coil sitting on his workbench, the personal project he tinkered with in his spare time. He looked at the elegant calculus on his screen. He looked at the grease permanently embedded under his fingernails. His fear of staying exactly where he was, for the first time, surpassed his fear of failing at something new. He picked up his comm unit. Sal, what's the universal dialing code for Sol Corva? Sol Corva was a statement. Centuries ago, builders had perfected the orbit of a terraformed moonlet to create the university. Its buildings were graceful, swooping structures of bone-white biopolymer that grew out of the manicured landscape. The air was clean, the light was soft, and the profound silence was an unnerving pressure against his ears. He stepped off the transport shuttle feeling utterly conspicuous, a smudge of grime on a pristine canvas. His worn synth-leather jacket and scuffed work boots stood in stark contrast to the flowing robes and immaculate uniforms worn by the scholars and students walking past with an unhurried confidence. He was acutely human, starkly out of place. Professor Tullius was waiting for him at the terminal, a warm, welcoming presence in the sterile environment. The patterns on his cranial hood swirled in vibrant, welcoming arrangements.
Liam, I am so glad that you have reconsidered.
Yeah, well, my friend can be persuasive, Liam mumbled, hoisting his duffel bag over his shoulder. Tullius led him on a tour, his calm narration a soothing counterpoint to Liam's jangled nerves. He pointed out the hall of unfettered inquiry, the library of all known things, and the gardens where rumor claimed gravity was a polite suggestion rather than a law. Dread grew in him. He had brought engine room grime into a pristine laboratory. Tullius's office was the one place offering a glimmer of comfort, a welcome island of lived-in chaos in the university's sterile sea. Bookshelves overflowed with actual paper books, strange alien artifacts set next to half-finished teacups. A projected stellar nursery schematic covered one wall, annotated with handwritten Lyrian script. The room revealed a mind still working and curious.
You put me at ease a little,
Liam admitted, looking at a particularly strange knotted piece of wood on a shelf.
It is a Zatharian meditation puzzle,
Tullius explained with a smile.
It has 6 dimensions. I've been working on it for a decade. It reminds me that some problems offer more enjoyment in the process than in the solution.
He gestured for Liam to sit, and, with fluid movements, prepared a cup of steaming aromatic tea.
Now, there is a small matter of university formality. To formalize your scholarship, you must enroll in a department, and to do that, you must pass a foundational placement exam.
Liam's stomach tightened.
An exam? A simple assessment,
Tullius said, his tone reassuring.
The assessment gauges your understanding of established theory, to tailor a curriculum to you. I have taken the liberty of enrolling you in the Advanced FTL Theory course, the most appropriate for your unique talents.
Liam gave a slow nod. Advanced FTL Theory. That sounded manageable.
The department head is the instructor for the course,
Tullius added, and a complex series of sharp, conflicting lines tightened the patterns on his hood.
A former student of mine, as it happens. Instructor Cor Donal.
The examination hall was unnervingly silent. Liam sat at a sterile white desk, a flex screen in front of him. The questions all derived from the standard Rylan-Korolev model. Complex, layered problems about warp field geometry, energy consumption curves, and causality violations. Liam knew the textbook answers. He'd spent the last week cramming. Tullius patiently guiding him through the dense theoretical framework. He understood the accepted methodology, but to him, the methodology was hopelessly inefficient, like digging a tunnel with a spoon when he had a plasma drill in his back pocket. He came to the final problem. A monster of a problem. Calculate the required energy and plasma injector modulations for a 1,000 light-year transit for a vessel of 5 million metric tons, navigating a temporal distortion field at the exit point that creates a significant gravimetric shear effect. Show all work. The standard solution would take pages of tensor calculus, involving iterative approximations and brute force computation. A different path presented itself. A shortcut. He looked around the silent hall. He could write down the long and clunky, yet correct, answer, or he could write down the right one. He took a deep breath and wrote. He used a few elegant lines of fluidic calculus instead of pages of tensors. He created the temporal distortion field as a confluence of currents, rather than an obstacle. He calculated the destination's primary current, factored in the temporal shear as a simple steering vector, and arrived at a solution. The solution took 5 lines. His solution was true, yet it defied their expected methods. To a traditionalist, it looked like gibberish.
But that was the truth, as he perceived it. He added a small note at the bottom of his answer. Methodology's novel, but the result is verifiable. It reduces energy consumption to a fraction of the standard model's requirements. He submitted the exam and walked out, a strange mix of defiance and dread churning inside him. A day later, Tullius met him in the Arboretum. The Lyrian's hood showed a troubled pattern of gray-blue.
You passed, Tullius said, by a narrow margin, and only after I intervened personally.
A heavy feeling settled in Liam's chest. The last question.
Indeed,
Tullius said.
The grading committee flagged your exam. One member called your solution alarming and rank pseudoscience. Another called it the deluded scribblings of an amateur. They would have failed you outright.
But the answer was right, Liam insisted.
Being right is insufficient here, Liam,
Tullius said, his voice softening.
In a place like this, you must also be right in the correct way. I showed them a simulation based on your figures. The numbers held up. They found the result irrefutable, so they grudgingly gave you a passing grade. But you have attracted attention.
Tullius's gaze was serious.
Instructor Cordonal was on that committee. He was the one who called your work deluded scribblings.
Instructor Cordonal was a Gavorn, a species from a high-gravity environment. A dense, compact being. An external framework of thick bone like obsidian encased his musculature. The framework gave him immense resilience, but limited his motion to deliberate, forceful gestures. He stood at the front of the lecture hall, a monolithic figure of unyielding dogma.
Faster than light travel is a science,
he began, his voice a low rumble, like stones shifting under pressure.
It is a hard science, governed by immutable laws. The Ryland Korolev model is the bedrock all modern astrophysics builds upon. It is complex, it is unforgiving, but it is proven. Our job here is to master these principles.
He scanned the students' faces, his small, dark eyes lingering for a fraction of a second on Liam. A chill went through Liam. This was a priest in his church, more than a teacher in a classroom. Later in the lecture, Cordonal projected a hypothetical problem onto the main screen. A cargo ship suffering a drive malfunction was drifting toward the unstable gravity well of a brown dwarf. Its nav computer had failed.
The challenge,
Cordonal rumbled,
is to calculate a single blind microjump to a safe vector using only the ship's last known velocity and the star's gravimetric readings. The standard procedure requires a full system diagnostic, which would take too long. How would you proceed?
The projector's hum was the only sound in the hall. The problem was a classic trap. The data precluded a conventional solution. Liam forgot where he was. The problem became a real ship with real people. The patterns emerged from the chaos. The answer was simple. He raised his hand. Cordonal ignored him. He called on a young Cygni student in the front row. The Cygni, whose species possessed a secondary vocal organ that produced resonating overtones, offered a textbook answer in a complex, chord-like voice.
You would attempt to reboot the secondary nav computer while plotting a series of sublight thruster burns to...
Incorrect.
Cordonal cut him off.
That would take too long. The ship would be consumed.
He let the failure hang in the air before he reluctantly turned his gaze to Liam.
Yes, Mr. O'Connell. You have a thought.
His tone was thick with condescension.
The nav computer is irrelevant,
Liam said, his voice clear in the quiet room.
The brown dwarf's gravity well is unstable, but it's emitting a constant gravimetric current. You can treat that as a guide. Modulate the drive coil to align that with the current, and it will pull the ship along the path of least resistance. It's like using a river's flow to guide a raft. A 5-second burn's all you need.
A murmur rippled through the class. The other students stared at him. The idea was absurdly simple, yet far beyond the scope of their training. Cordonal's features remained rigid.
Show your work, Mr. O'Connell.
Liam walked to the front of the hall and took the stylus for the public display. In a few quick strokes, he sketched out a fluidic state equation. Compact, elegant, and to anyone but him and Tellius, utterly alien. Cordonal stared at the equation for a long moment. Contempt hardened his dense features.
This,
He said, his voice dangerously low.
is mathematical poetry. It lacks substance.
With a single decisive swipe, he erased Liam's work from the board.
In this classroom, we deal in science, and we dismiss fantasy.
Cordonal said, his back to Liam.
Instinct and shortcuts are the death of true inquiry. They lead to catastrophic failure. Remember that.
The dismissal was absolute. Humiliated, Liam walked back to his seat, the weight of the other students' stares pressing down on him. Liam stormed into Tellius's cluttered office, his face flushed with anger.
He called it poetry. He erased it like it was meaningless.
Tellius, who was tending with care to a pot of delicate Lyrian moss that hummed with the low energy used to calibrate his optical instruments, looked up. He gestured with a hand to a chair.
Tea. Tea is the last thing that I need.
Liam paced the room, clenching his fists.
I want him to listen. He's so wrapped up in his precious dogma that he's blind to a simple solution when it's right in front of his face.
The professor finished misting his moss and turned his full attention to Liam. The patterns on his hood slowed to a gentle, sympathetic rhythm.
Sit, Liam. Please.
Liam reluctantly slumped into the chair. Tellius poured the tea anyway and pushed a cup towards him. The steam carried a calming, citrus-like aroma.
Cordonal was one of my most brilliant students,
Tellius said, his voice low and tinged with an old sadness.
Much like you, he saw patterns that others missed. Impatient with established methods and intuitive.
Liam looked up, surprised.
And about 15 years ago,
Tellius continued, his gaze distant.
he was working on a new predictive model for calculating FTL exit vectors. A theoretical shortcut, brilliant in its simplicity. He convinced himself it would revolutionize navigation. I urged caution. His model was brilliant, but it was untested. It overlooked certain chaotic variables.
Tellius took a slow sip of his tea.
Arrogant and believing so strongly in his own intellect, he convinced the university to allow a drone test flight using his new framework. He bypassed several safety protocols to push the test forward.
The professor paused, the memory clearly painful.
The drone's jump was targeted for an empty sector, but his theory had a flaw. A tiny decimal point error in his handling of background field interference. The drone misjumped. It materialized in the middle of a populated shipping lane, directly in a passenger liner's path.
A knot of dread formed in his stomach. What happened?
The liner's pilot performed heroically, but the maneuver caused severe damage. Everyone survived, though many suffered injuries, and the fallout ruined careers. Cordonal's was one of them.
Tellius sighed, a soft rustling sound.
The university censured him and impounded his research. He lost everything. To save himself, to rebuild his life, he repudiated everything he had once believed in. He rejected intuition. He embraced rigid, unyielding dogma as a shield. He believes procedure and established theory are the only things protecting the galaxy from another catastrophe of his making.
The story settled in the quiet office, reframing all of it. Cordonal was more than an arrogant academic. He was a man terrified of his own shadow.
When he looks at you, Liam,
Tellius said, his voice compassionate,
he sees the ghost of his younger self. He sees the same brilliance, the same impatience, the same danger. He opposes you in a desperate attempt to atone for his own past.
Liam stared into his teacup. His anger had cooled, replaced by a complex, bitter understanding.
So what do I do?
He asked.
How do I fight that? Fighting him on his terms is a battle that guarantees you a loss.
Tullius agreed.
The establishment will always side with its own. You must learn their language, the formal language of physics. You must use it to translate your ideas into a form that compels their acceptance. Build a bridge between your calculus and theirs, Liam. A bridge so solid and logical, it compels them to cross it.
Tullius leaned forward, his voice firm.
Show him, Liam, instead of telling him.
The Library of All Known Things was less a building and more a small city dedicated to information storage. Liam stared at more books, flex screens, and informational data shards than he had seen in his entire life. It smelled of old paper and dust-free, perfectly regulated air. His new prison. He spent weeks, then months, buried in the dense, formal textbooks of modern physics. The work was a grind. The established theories felt clunky and inefficient to him, like trying to describe a sphere by listing the coordinates of every point on its surface. His own calculus described the sphere with a single elegant equation, but his equation had no value here. He struggled. The formal mathematics were a foreign language, and he was attempting to learn it by memorizing a dictionary. His frustration grew into a constant, simmering rage. He was a fraud, mimicking the scholars around him. Tullius's guidance was his only lifeline. The Lyrian professor was infinitely patient. He offered questions instead of answers.
Why does the Rylan-Korlev model require 11 dimensions? He'd ask. What is the fundamental principle it describes?
Painstakingly, the structure revealed itself. He perceived the clumsy machinery that the old physicists had built to approximate the universe. And within it, the gaps where his own simpler tools could fit. He discovered the cognates, the shared roots that bridged his intuitive understanding with their formal proofs. He built the bridge. He spent his days in the library and his nights in his small dorm room, his flex screen glowing. He filled pages with translations, expressing his fluidic state concepts in the language of tensor fields and mechanics. The equations were longer, less elegant, but they were recognizable. A dialect the establishment might understand. One night, exhausted and on the verge of giving up, he made a video call home. Sal's face appeared on his screen. A bright shock of pink hair and a mischievous grin. The noisy, chaotic clang of the repair bay behind him was like music to his ears.
Well, well,
he said, his voice a welcoming blast of sarcasm.
Look at you, Mr. University. You look clean. It's disgusting.
Liam managed a weak smile. It's good to see you too, Sal.
So, you rewriting the laws of physics yet, or you still just a pain in my ass from a longer distance, huh?
Little bit of both, he admitted. He told him about Cor Donal, about the library, about the struggle to translate his ideas. Sal listened patiently, his expression softening.
Sounds rough, kid. But you're still there, right? You're holding on.
So far.
Good,
he said firmly.
Because Mako tried to intuitively adjust a grav lifter yesterday and ended up pinning a cargo drone to the ceiling. We need you to figure this stuff out so the rest of us idiots stay in one piece, huh?
His grin returned.
No pressure, though.
The call reminded him of his identity. A mechanic, a problem solver. And this, learning the formal language, building the bridge, was the biggest, most complicated engine he'd ever had to fix. His determination recharged, he returned to his books. The midterm exam was an ambush. As the proctor droids distributed the flex screens, Cor Donal walked directly to Liam's desk and placed a different screen in front of him.
Mr. O'Connell,
the Gavorn rumbled, loud enough for the entire class to hear.
Given your unique aptitude, I have prepared a separate examination for you. I have designed it to better assess the breadth of your knowledge.
The message was clear. This was a challenge, a public execution. Liam activated the screen. The problems deviated wildly from the course material. Obscure, archaic problems drawn from the scientific history's dustbin. He recognized them from his deep dive in the library. Famous theoretical dead ends. Paradoxes that had stymied physicists for centuries before their abandonment. The first question centered on the discredited Zermelo postulate of etheric drag. The second involved a blatant misapplication of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle to a macroscopic object. There were traps. O'Donnell constructed each one to lead a student down a rabbit hole of flawed logic, ending in a nonsensical, paradoxical conclusion. He built them to be failed. He understood the game. O'Donnell wanted to prove that Liam's intuitive approach was just intellectual sloppiness, demonstrating that his ideas would collapse into nonsense when detached from the rigid guardrails of established theory. A slow anger burned in Liam's chest. He chose a different game. He sidestepped the unsolvable calculations and began to type. For each question, he composed a short, concise essay. On question 1, he typed, "This problem relies on the Zermelo postulate, which was empirically disproven by the Michelson-Morley experiment in 1887 of the Old Terran calendar. The postulate's assumption of a fixed luminiferous aether is incompatible with special relativity. Therefore, the problem's premise is flawed." On question 2, he continued, "This problem incorrectly applies a quantum principle to a classical system. Attempting to calculate the uncertainty of a starship's position in this manner is a category error. This fallacy echoes the historical precedent of failed attempts to create a perpetual motion machine during the pre-FTL era." He went through the entire exam like that, deconstructing each trap by citing the historical context and the fundamental flaw in its premise. He moved beyond answering the questions to grading them. He finished early. He submitted the screen and walked from the hall, the weight of O'Donnell's furious stare on his back. A few days later, Tullius brought the results to his office.
He gave you a C-,
the professor said, a hint of amusement in his voice. The patterns on his hood swirled in complex, conflicting shapes.
He wrote here that your answers showed a superficial grasp of historical context, but failed to engage with the mathematical rigor of the problems presented.
He's furious because I saw his trap and I walked around it, Liam said.
He is furious because you saw the trap, named it, and then explained its design back to him,
Tullius corrected.
You outmaneuvered him, Liam, and that is something a man like O'Donnell finds unforgivable.
The Lyrian's expression grew serious.
His actions during the midterm violated university ethical standards. I have submitted a formal grievance to the Board of Regents. The final exam will be more than a test. Prepare yourself.
The pressure aided him. In the university's common areas, the other students collaborated, effortlessly debating the finer points of established theories. A clumsy tourist with a phrasebook, he had tried to work twice as hard just to keep up, translating every concept back and forth between their physics and his. He had started skipping classes, the weight of O'Donnell's condescension too much to bear. He doubted himself. What if the Gavorn was right? What if he was just a fraud? A one-trick pony whose clever knack for fixing engines failed to translate to real science. A sense of imposture became a constant pressure on his chest. Tullius found him one afternoon in the campus arboretum, hiding under the enormous, color-shifting leaves of the Lyrian flora. He was staring into space, his work slate forgotten on the bench beside him. The professor sat next to Liam in silence, unpacking a small meal from a container. A Lyrian dish. Small, savory cakes made from crystallized nectar and sun-dried river moss. He offered one to Liam. They ate in a comfortable silence, punctuated by the rustle of leaves and the distant melodic chime that marked the passing academic hour. Liam expected a pep talk, a lecture, some words of encouragement. Tullius offered a story instead. When they had finished eating, the professor leaned back, looking up at the strange, alien foliage.
On my world,
Tullius said, his voice soft,
We once had a great musician. His name was Elias. He composed symphonies that could make the stones weep. Yet he was born deaf, experiencing music only as vibration. Liam looked at him, confused. He experienced the music through feeling, Tellius continued. He would lie on the concert hall floor, his hands and body pressed against the wood, and he would feel the vibrations. He experienced the music as a complex, tactile pattern, a language unique to him. The other musicians, the ones with perfect hearing, they had tried to teach him their rules, their scales, their notations. He found the concepts alien, a language his mind had tried to translate into a medium of his own feeling.
Tellius turned his head, his two eyes fixing on Liam with a profound, quiet intensity.
They experience the music through hearing, Liam. You feel it. You feel the universe's vibrations. Cordonal and the others, the notes on the page limit them. They think that is the only way to understand the symphony.
He placed a light, gentle hand on Liam's shoulder.
Allow no one to convince you that your way of perceiving is a weakness,
Tellius said.
You are listening to a deeper music. That is your greatest strength, Liam.
The simple, profound statement cut through the fog of Liam's self-doubt. This reframed his problem beautifully, offering perspective over a different solution. He was whole, just different. His resolve hardened. He would do more than pass Cordonal's final. He would write his own symphony. The day of the final exam arrived. The air in the lecture hall was thick with the electric tension of 200 stressed-out students. Instructor Cordonal stood at the front, his posture more rigid than ever. He looked like a statue dedicated to the concept of final judgment. When the clock chimed, Cordonal activated the main screen. A single block of text appeared.
The final problem,
he announced, his voice echoing in the cavernous room,
is the Charybdis anomaly.
A collective gasp went through the air. Even Liam felt a jolt. The Charybdis anomaly was a legend, a notorious star system with the trinary core of a black hole, a magnetar, and a neutron star. Their orbits were a chaotic, unpredictable dance, generating gravitational tides that could tear a ship apart. The Kobayashi Maru of astrophysics, an unwinnable scenario. A classic academic exercise used for decades to demonstrate the absolute theoretical limits of the Rylan-Korolev model. The goal was to prove its unsolvability.
You have 3 hours,
Cordonal stated, his gaze sweeping the room before landing on Liam.
Prove, using established principles, why a safe FTL jump through the anomaly is a mathematical paradox. Your grade depends on the elegance and the rigor of your proof.
Liam stared at the data streaming onto his flex screen. Gravitational wave charts, magnetic field fluctuations, temporal distortion readings. A chaotic, deadly storm of numbers. The other students were already writing, laying out the foundational axioms for their proofs of paradox. Liam, however, looked through the chaos. He tilted his head, listening. The vibrations reached him, and beneath the screaming noise of the gravitational tides, a pattern emerged. A complex, layered rhythm, like 3 different drum beats weaving in and out of sync. Where everyone else saw a wall, Liam saw a doorway. The anomaly was more than chaos, a complex interlocking series of gravimetric currents, solvable. He just needed to find the right key, the right frequency to tune the lock. A slow smile spread across Liam's face. Cordonal had built him a fortress, and he had just handed Liam the master key. He could solve it. He could do more than prove the problem was solvable. He could plot a safe course right through the heart of it. A quiet intensity settled over Liam. While the other students hunched over their screens, wrestling with proofs of failure, Liam worked. The equations of his fluidic calculus flowed from his stylus, effortless and clean. He transcribed the music in the data. He identified the 3 stellar bodies' core gravimetric currents. He mapped their chaotic interplay as a medium with its own flows, distinct from a simple force. A turbulent but navigable river. He found the quiet eddies, the stable currents hidden within the storm. But then he remembered Tullius's advice: build a bridge. He stopped. The right answer was insufficient. He had to show them the path. He created a new section in his exam file. He undertook the slow, arduous process of translation. He took his core principles and expressed them in their language. He mapped the gravimetric currents he perceived to the established language of the gravitational wave amplitudes, a novel connection. He demonstrated how a ship's drive coil, properly modulated, could use the magnetar's ferocious magnetic field as a shield against the black hole's tidal forces. He built the bridge, stone by painstaking stone, from his world to theirs. The hardest work he had ever done. At last, he had a path. A safe route through the impassable anomaly. As a final touch, he pulled his own work slate out. The beat-up, greasy one from his old life. He ran a quick, dirty simulation, plugging in his final navigational path. On the small screen, a tiny blue dot representing a ship threaded the needle, weaving through Charybdis's simulated chaos in a perfect, graceful arc. He appended the simulation logs and a short, elegant proof of his unified theory to the back of his exam booklet as an annex. On the final page, beneath the final line of data, he wrote a simple dedication: for Professor Tullius. He submitted his exam with 3 minutes to spare and walked from the hall, strangely calm. He had built his bridge. Now they had to cross it. Days later, Cor Donal stood before the class to hand back the graded final exams. The atmosphere was funereal. He stood rigid, his expression fixed, as he placed a flex screen on each desk. He saved Liam for last. He walked to Liam's desk, holding his flex screen like it was a piece of contaminated refuse. The entire class was watching, silent. From the back of the lecture hall, also watching, stood Professor Tullius. Beside him were two figures new to Liam, a severe-looking human woman and a being of interlocking geometric plates who'd shimmered under the lights. They wore the emblem of the university's Board of Regents. Cor Donal held up Liam's screen for the whole class to see. His voice was heavy with disdain.
While most of you provided competent proofs of the Charybdis anomaly's impassibility,
He announced.
Mr. O'Connell chose a different path.
He paused for dramatic effect.
Mr. O'Connell's solution is a work of fiction. He has fabricated astrophysics principles and instead submitted pages of fanciful symbols and unsubstantiated claims. The most flagrant display of academic arrogance I have ever witnessed.
He looked directly at Liam, his eyes burning with cold triumph.
His grade is a failure.
The words hung in the dead silent room. Cor Donal dropped the exam screen into Liam's desk with a loud, final clatter. The grade displayed on the screen was a large, glowing red F. He ignored the grade and the other students. He looked up and he met Cor Donal's gaze. His expression was calm and steady, his confidence clear. He spoke, his voice quiet but carrying through the stillness. Turn the page. Cor Donal scoffed.
The exam is over. Your exam ends with a nonsensical conclusion.
Turn the page, Liam said, his voice even. Something in Liam's quiet, unshakable confidence gave the instructor pause. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his stony features. Annoyed and wanting to complete the humiliation, he snatched the screen back up. With a flick of his thumb, he scrolled past Liam's main work. He stopped. He was looking at the first page of the annex, at the translated equations, the bridge. His brow furrowed in confusion. He scrolled again. The simulation data. The neat columns of numbers showing a flawless transit. The projected flight path. The graceful curve through the heart of the storm. His expression shifted. The smug contempt drained away, replaced by disbelief. Then, by a dawning, horrified realization. The class watched, mesmerized as their unshakable instructor crumbled. He scrolled again, frantically now, his hand shaking slightly. He had reached the final page, a concise, devastatingly simple proof of the unified theory. And beneath it, the dedication. For Professor Tellius. Cordonal looked up sharply. He looked to the back of the room. His old mentor stood there, the patterns on Tellius's cranial hood forming a single unwavering mandala of radiant vindication. The Board of Regents stood beside him, their expressions sharp and calculating. He understood. This was a tribunal. From his vantage point, Tellius watched as comprehension at last shattered Cordonal's rigid worldview. The moment arrived when the man understood that Liam had done more than find a different answer. He had revealed that the question itself was wrong. The impassable fortress was a myth. The unsolvable problem had a single, simple, elegant solution. Cordonal stood frozen, the flex screen trembling in his grip. The professional and personal humiliation was a total self-inflicted wound. He had dismissed a generational genius and had tried to publicly destroy him in front of the people who held the university's future in their hands. After a long, agonizing moment, he lowered the screen. In silence, he walked back to his desk, sat down heavily, and stared into space, a broken statue. A murmur erupted among the students as they grasped the magnitude of what had just happened. Liam gathered his things. He stood up and walked from the silent, buzzing lecture hall. Tellius and the regents met him in the corridor. Tellius met his gaze, then reached out and placed a hand on Liam's shoulder. For the first time since arriving at Sol Curva, Liam allowed himself a small, genuine smile. He had crossed the bridge, and he had brought the whole world along with him. The fallout was swift and seismic. The Board of Regents, far more interested in the patents for a revolutionary FTL drive than an academic dogma, moved with decisive speed. News of Liam's solution, and of Instructor Cordonal's attempt to suppress it in front of them, spread rapidly through the university. The university summoned Cordonal to a closed-door meeting, and he was subsequently dismissed. A university-wide memo announced his immediate resignation for personal reasons. 2 days later, Liam was in Tellius's office, looking at an offer from the university administration. They were eager to control the narrative and claim his breakthrough as their own. It offered him a prestigious research fellowship, a fully funded laboratory, a team of his choosing, and a salary that made his eyes water. The immense weight of expectation settled on him. He looked at Tellius.
"The choice is yours, Liam,"
the professor said. The patterns on his hood stood a calm, steady silver.
"You have proven yourself. You can stay here. You can go to any research institution in the Compact. You can go home. You have proven yourself a pioneer."
Liam picked up his comm unit. He dialed a familiar number. Sal's face appeared, the repair bays clang a comforting roar behind him.
"Tell me you passed,"
he said, his grin wide.
Yeah, something like that,
Liam said. He told him everything. About the exam, about Cordonal, about the offer from the university. His grin vanished, replaced by open-mouthed shock. Then he let out a whoop of unrestrained joy that nearly overloaded his comm speaker.
"You did it! You son of a bitch, you did it!"
He could hear him yelling the news to the rest of the crew, their answering cheers echoing in the background. When his face came back into view, his eyes shone.
"So, I guess this is it, huh? Staying there, playing with the big brains?"
A tremor of uncertainty entered his voice, the fear that Liam would leave their world behind for good. Liam looked at the offer on the table, then at his friend's face on the screen. The path forward was clear. "I'm taking the fellowship," he said. "My first project will be practical. I'm designing a new, affordable, efficient hyperdrive based on fluidic calculus. A drive for ships like the Iron Grasp, for freighters and haulers and tramp steamers." He leaned closer to the screen, a real confident smile on his face. And I need help to build it from an ivory tower. I need a head of practical application, someone who knows how to get their hands dirty and tell me when my genius ideas are stupid. I was thinking of starting a new company, O'Connell Corey Drive Systems. You'll handle the wrenches, I'll handle the numbers. His eyes grew misty, but his grin was fiercer than ever. It's got a nice ring to it, but I get top billing. Corey O'Connell sounds better. Yeah, okay, we'll talk. Liam laughed. He ended the call and looked out Tellius's office window. The stars burned with a cold, steady light. They were closer now. A mechanic who fixed ships. He would now give them a whole new map, taking his world with him to chart a new future.